Okay, everybody, welcome to the session. Just to let you know that this session will be recorded for later distribution. If you don't want to be recorded, best to keep your video off, and it'll be like you weren't here. Okay, Mercedes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today. On behalf of Waddle, a warm welcome to all. We would like to also thank Dr. Sasha Nikolic and Associate Professor Kaz Sanderson for their invaluable time on the discussion today of their research titled ChatGPT versus Engineering Education Assessment, where they will discuss how ChatGPT can support and facilitate learning. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which the University of Wollongong is situated. We pay our respects to Aboriginal elders past and present, who are the knowledge holders and teachers. We acknowledge their continued spiritual and cultural connection to country. As we share knowledge, teaching, learning, and research within the university, we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of the country. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sasha.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'd just like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians of land as well. All right, so I'll just start a little bit about our study. And it was conducted by a multi-institutional team. Me and Kaz were from URW. I was the project lead. And we did that because we wanted an overview of different approaches across Australia. We looked at a whole range of subjects across the engineering spectrum, which included maths and physics. And in our paper, which is highlighted in the top corner, we look at the results at a subject level and at a assessment type level. And because we have such a broad audience in this presentation, we'll only be exploring the analysis at that assessment type level. I do encourage you, if at any point in this presentation you think, yes, this is good information, other people should know about it, to tweet the link of our paper or put on LinkedIn, whichever social media platform that you use. The more that this information gets spread out into the community, the greater benefit it will be to others. Kaz will be monitoring the chat. I won't be. So if there's any questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. At the end of each assessment type, I will be providing a little opportunity, about 3 minutes, for any quick questions or reflection that you might want to add. I'll start off by providing a little bit of a brief overview of the study, and then we'll get into the results. I'll try and have as much discussion as possible throughout. So the key to our study was that we undertook a SWOT analysis. So each team member went through all the assessment tasks in the subjects that they teach to find out, would a student be able to pass? And in that activity, we were able to explore and identify opportunities where it could actually be used as a tool as well. So you're getting a good holistic look at the implications of ChatGPT in our assessment tasks. As a disclaimer, you know, the research team aren't experts on how AI works, on copyright issues, on security issues, on accessibility issues, ethical consequences, and so forth. I've had this discussion before, and it has a lot of, you know, related questions, but we haven't got the answers to all those questions, unfortunately. So our scope really is in the domain of what's the impact on our assessment tasks. You'll see a whole range of images. A lot of those images themselves were created via artificial intelligence. An example of a command and the response can be seen on this slide. And that just brings to attention that there are so many different AI tools. And we've just focused primarily on one, which is ChatGPT version 3, which creates a limitation in that just before we published our results, ChatGPT 4 was released. And you know, it's constantly being improved. So what we present is the worst possible results at that time. Whatever our results are, it's probably much better now. So you just need to keep that in mind as we go. We also considered that all assessment tasks could be conducted at home without the fear of any proctoring tools or anything like that. So it's basically what would happen if a student was left to their own device to use ChatGPT. We have incorporated a little bit of Wolfram Alpha into our analysis, and Kaz will be discussing that in one section. And the major limitation is obviously the prompt engineering ability of the team. So we looked at literature review, systematic literature review on why students cheat. And the primary reason is if the reward outweighs the risk, that they will. And this is pretty common sense, and I think it applies to everybody. But I guess what we have to ask ourselves is, just because they can, will they cheat? We know a lot of our students won't, but some will. And we know that they will is because even the academic community, there are bad apples in there, and they will also find opportunities to cheat if they can. So while cheating is the focus I guess of this discussion, we need to think beyond that and think about, all right, what are other ways can we look at using AI in our assessment tasks? We also need to highlight that cheating is not something new. Regardless of the format, students find ways to cheat. This can include, did I record this? This can include taller breaks, using hidden notes. I've seen cases of students swapping identity and someone else is sitting the exam for them in the lecture hall. Big issues, contract cheating, we have plagiarism, we have leaking information from one exam to the next. So this is not anything new. We have our own homegrown expert on academic integrity, Anne. So if you want to learn a little bit about contract cheating and the sort, I refer you to her articles. Outside of UIW, Philip Dawson has got some great articles as well on cheating and how it's possible. So I just want to highlight, this is not nothing new. It's just a new tool and a new way. So across all of the team, we were able to group our assessment, different types of assessment, into the following categories. And this is how we will be rolling through today's presentation. After each one, we'll stop for a couple of minutes and just reflect on them and answer any questions. The key to using ChatGPT is a skill called prompt engineering. That's your ability to tell ChatGPT what output you would like. So I've heard a lot of people complain that ChatGPT is not very good, but in reality, it's that you're not a very good prompt engineer. So pretty much anything is possible if you're prepared to learn how to provide the right input into the program. For example, here, if you want ChatGPT to write exactly in your writing style, there is a way to train ChatGPT to write exactly as you do today. So prompt engineering, how much was required? Our study uses the following metrics. Not applicable is that it's generally not applicable. For example, ChatGPT can't present an oral presentation on behalf of the students. We have fail, where the result, regardless of what we did, just would end up as a fail. We have level 1. That meant that a pass was achievable simply by copy pasting the question into ChatGPT. We have level 2, where modification to the prompt was needing to be able to get it to a passable output. And this would be minor, but basically all you needed to do is have a little bit of an understanding of what the output should look like. And level 3 required substantial modification of the input to get it right. The key to levels 2 and level 3 is that the student needs to know what the output should look like. And one thing that we know about students who fail especially the ones in my subject, is that the reason why they fail is that they don't understand what the output should look like in the first place. So level 2, level 3 requires students in the know. In terms of classification, we have pass. So at a minimum, a passing grade would be achieved. And we only did this metric as pass if it was subjective. So if it was a subjective assessment, we didn't go into any scoring because we couldn't remove the bias from that. The only time we included a score is if it was a quantitative assessment task where it was basically a right or wrong answer. Fail is a passing grade was not achieved. We have component pass. So for example, in a design project, you have multiple different components. It could pass a specific component within that assessment task, not the entire assessment task. And possible pass is where, in a sense, it was borderline. The output that ChatGPT produced would have failed, but if a student built upon it, for example, writing some extra references into the work, that could bring it up to a pass level. All right, so let's get into it. Let's start by round 1, the online quiz. So let's have a look at round 1. 30 seconds. Who's going to win in terms of online quizzes? Okay. I'll share the result. 61% say ChatGPT, 24% engineering education assessment, and 15% it's a tied result. Let's see where the winner lies. 1-0 to ChatGPT. And as a very, very quick summary, this is what the output looks like. The main thing to catch your eye is the difference between black is pass, red is fail. We have a whole range of subjects. Not all the data is put into this table, but just enough to get the message across. So pretty much ChatGPT can pass any assessment quiz that we've hit the students with. It did fail one, but the reason why it failed this one here is because it wasn't really so much a traditional quiz, whereas more a verification activity using the quiz mode. But you can see if student 1 of the P's means degrees type pass, it is highly possible. We start off by where ChatGPT gets questions wrong, and it comes down to context. So if you have a particular context that is different to what might be mainstream, then it will be looking at the mainstream context, unless of course it's read the context that that you're asking on. The other factor is questions where it's very difficult to describe to ChatGPT what is required. Now, within the engineering space, the way that we have handled academic integrity on online quizzes is by creating uniqueness in every question that students get. So this is a typical question that we use where we have the comment format, but we have a number of parameters which are generated based on some value, for example, the student ID. That way, their students can't copy off each other because each student needs to use the valuable time within the exam to complete the activity. The problem with ChatGPT is it doesn't matter what the values are. If the question is simple enough, it will be able to calculate it nice and quickly. So what we've been using at the moment really is a weakness now. These are the types of questions that ChatGPT can get correct, and there's a huge diversity to them. And the key component, and I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide, is that if you can describe it easily, it can pretty much get it correct. depending on the mathematical complexity of the question, which we'll talk a little bit more in the second round of this knockout. So the key is to slowing it down. And the key to slowing it down is through the use of lots of figures and tables. So what we see here is a question that comes out of a physics exam, and you have a bit of visual data. So to get this right in ChatGPT, a student would need to have the ability to take what is in that figure and convert it into words. Now, a student struggling to get that question correct might struggle to work out how to actually translate that into words. But if they did, they can get the question correct. Here is another example. If the student can take what the question is, place it into words, ChatGPT more likely than not will be able to come up with a pretty suitable answer. Now, while it might be problemsome to actually go through and type things up, what we have now coming on board is browser extensions. So here is an example of one linked to ChatGPT 4, where a student can launch this browser extension and the student doesn't even need to type anything. The extension will go through your Moodle quiz and provide the most likely answer. So as long as you're not concerned about getting 100, you can go through and pass the exam using the extension. Or you could use it as a starting point, go through, let ChatGPT put in the best case answer, and then slowly you can go through and see in your own time whether the answer is correct or not, and modify as needed. Now, while that's an advantage of slowing things down, what is coming into the future is Visual GPT. And here are a few examples of what Visual GPT can do. And basically it can take an image, recognize what is going on, and use that to translate into the question. So what I'm classing now as ability to slow down will probably only be suitable for maybe the next 12 to 24 months. Once this technology becomes super good, I think figures and tables will be eaten for dust. All right, so I'm going to stop there, and we're going to use just a couple of minutes for any questions or reflections on what we've seen so far. I have one here from Veronica. Does the manipulation of the question and request in ChatGPT actually show student understanding of the skill required to solve the equation? Yes. So ChatGPT will give you line by line, pretty much explanation of what it is doing. And a little bit more of that answer will be talked about in round 2. The statics question rewriting is unclear. That could be correct. However, it's enough to get the job done, to get the right answer. I have a question from Albert. I think we need to think beyond simply modifying assessment to include the whole of teaching process. I would love to know your thoughts on this. And definitely, this is just a starting point of opening up the conversation. Later on, especially in the later rounds, we'll start to introduce some ideas of how we can change teaching, but being the simplest examples, we can't go into too much detail here, but we will explore this a little bit more as we go on. Okay, I'll close the chat and we'll move on to round 2, which is numerical assignments and exams. And I'll do the poll for round 2. Let's see what you think here. Okay. Well, after seeing round one, looks like the confidence in ChatGPT's ability has increased, which is not surprising. This section here is actually going to be facilitated by Kaz. So I will pass on to her.
Yep. So Sasha, do you want to show the winner for this round? And yes, most of you are right. ChatGPT does win this one, but not as convincingly as you may think. We're going to see it's not as good with numbers as you might expect. So let's have a look at the assessment tasks. You can see here it actually failed a couple, mainly because while ChatGPT was very, very good at coming up with a methodology for solving all the numerical questions, its ability to calculate was not that great. So where it could tell you what you needed to do to solve the questions, it often didn't actually give the correct answer. So you can see it failed a mid-session exam and an intra-session exam in a data analysis test. Now, the tricky thing with numerical assessment tasks too is you couldn't just take the question and copy and paste because there's lots of symbolic representation required. So here are a couple of examples of things that it got wrong. The first couple, of course, it has diagrams that you need to explain. The curious one is the one on the right, where it's a true or false question. It claims it's true. The question is actually false. And then the first paragraph, it goes to give reasons why the statement is false. And then the second paragraph gives reasons why it's true. So it confused itself completely. Now, I did try this question again, and of course, it gave me a different answer, or it was still a little bit confused over what to do. So it wasn't 100% reliable, which you might think it would be because the numbers is easy to calculate. But in this case, ChatGPT wasn't that great. But let's have a look at the things that it got correct. Of course, a lot of questions, the one at the top there, you could copy and paste because the whole question is just text. Same thing down the bottom. So anything where you've just got a text question and a simple calculation, it was okay. The one on the right, it could even do a proof of a trigonometric equation. This is where knowing how to type mathematics into a computer started to come into play. So you had to write the word theta for the symbol theta, and the hat 2 for a square. So knowing a little bit of syntax for writing maths or typing mathematics was an advantage. And that's probably where we start to get into some prompt engineering here for the mathematics. There are some other questions, I think, coming up. But this is an example of what happened more than I expected would happen. So here's a question where I had to enter a matrix, which is an array of numbers with brackets around the side. So the student had to know how to enter a matrix. And you can see on the left there that after a little bit of experimentation, I found a way. But it's not necessarily a case where the student needed to know what the output was. It was more that ChatGPT just didn't give an answer or gave nonsense, obvious, clear nonsense when you didn't type it in correctly. So after a little bit, worked out how to do it. And so there's my array with 3 rows separated by semicolons and with triangle brackets on the side. And then it was happy from there on. But the solution that it gave, beautiful, beautiful outline, correct explanation, knew exactly what to do, where to start, how to go about it, but its algebra and mathematics was all wrong. So this particular question has 3 eigenvalues. It should have given me 3 answers at the bottom, and it just gave me 1. And it was actually incorrect. So if I didn't know this came from a computer, that's how I marked, this was one of my questions. I just said, well, okay, if a student were to give me this, what would I give them for it? And I think I would have given them 2 out of 5 because they have some understanding of what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be going about it. But they couldn't do the calculations, or they made a mistake in their calculations, and then I'll just sort of give them the benefit of the doubt that everything else from the first mistake onwards was okay. So ChatGPT scored highly on partial marks throughout, but just didn't often didn't get simple actual calculations correct when they were embedded in a much more complex question. So even simple arithmetic of adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing, it still got that wrong when it was part of a much, much bigger question. So if we move on, you can slow it down with figures and tables. So, or you can spend hours trying to engineer this in the prompt to get it to understand what was going on. But as Sasha has already said, this is going to be a thing of the past. In probably 12 months' time, figures and tables, it'll be all over it. And what I have discovered has aligned with the data, because you can see there in the blue, that's the ChatGPT that we used for most of our stuff. And you can see that maths, certainly calculus on the far left there, scored very, very poorly. But with ChatGPT 4 coming out, it started to improve its calculations and started to improve its results. Yep. And of course, what I did is I compared the answers that I would get from ChatGPT to what you would get if I popped the question into Wolfram Alpha. Now, Wolfram Alpha has been around for quite some time. So we in mathematics have understood that students can get answers and work solutions pretty quickly online. But with Wolfram Alpha, you have to pay to get the work solutions. You can get an answer for free. Now, Wolfram Alpha is calculation only. So if I asked it a true or false question, it wouldn't give me an answer. But ChatGPT could do those true or false questions for the most part. And so what I ended up doing is, if I was a student who tried ChatGPT with an assignment and got my calculations wrong, but got partial marks for giving correct explanation, I would have gone, okay, well, I'll use ChatGPT to tell me what to do and get Wolfram Alpha to do those calculations. And I've all of a sudden going to start get really high marks. And that's what we found when I did the comparison of the assessment tasks in our research. And then we've just recently found out that there is now a plugin for Wolfram Alpha for ChatGPT. So now that you're combining ChatGPT with the calculation power of Wolfram Alpha, it's a complete game changer. And these results for the numerical part of our assessment is just going to go up. ChatGPT is going to score even higher. Now, you can see here Khan Academy are using ChatGPT as kind of a personal tutor. And I've started telling students to do exactly that. Because if I change my assessment tasks, rather than be big assignments, but to be small assignments, lots of small assignments that are not worth a whole lot, but say, go and get ChatGPT to teach you how to do these things, and then ask them to come and do an exam at the end on campus where to show what they've learned, I think that's a very good use of ChatGPT. It can stop lots and lots of students emailing me lots and lots of questions. And I would have to say, I took a break from teaching engineering maths for a while, and now I've come back. I am getting far less questions than I ever used to. So students are already doing this. They're already Googling, and they're already asking the internet for answers to questions that they might have, mathematically speaking. So that's one way to use ChatGPT for the numerical side of things. That's pretty much all I was going to say. So if anybody has any questions or reflections, there's a lot been going on in the chat that I haven't been watching as I've been talking.
There doesn't seem to be any maths related questions there.
Yeah, there's a question about how much time does it take to take the exam and put it into ChatGPT. I will actually say, I mean, I spent quite a few times over a weekend, but I put every single assessment task in. Probably took me less to prompt engineer the exam and put it in than the actual allocated time to sit in the exam, because ChatGPT is pretty much instant with its results. You don't wait very long. There are other websites, like other answering services where you can put up, say, Chegg. You used to be able to put up your question. You had to wait. Sometimes you had to wait 24 hours to get a response. So ChatGPT is very, very quick. And if you don't like the answer you get, just put it in again. Chances are you'll get a different answer anyway.
Yeah. It's key to remember as well that if you're putting in your questions into ChatGPT, you're training ChatGPT on your exam.
Yes.
So you're actually helping improve it to beat your assessment tasks. All right, let's move on to the next round. Next three is oral. Let's do our poll, round 3. So what we see here is a little bit of a change. We think, all right, engineering education is going to win. Let's see who the winner is. It's actually a tie, but why? So it's the reason why it's a tie is because it's actually complicated. So if we think about oral presentations, ChatGPT can't take the place of the student. But what it can do is provide fabulous resources to help them prepare for that presentation, including providing the script. So what we get here is a lot of possible passes in that by itself it's a fail, but it can help if the student takes the extra steps to help them pass. So the question is what's important in our learning design? Do you want to test and see if students can present information, or do we want to see if they can understand information? Now, in this context, I'm going to show you an introduction to Microsoft Copilot, and then how it can be used to help oral presentations. So let me just change the mode for video clip. Okay, let's play. So Microsoft Copilot is being rolled out across Microsoft 365 into the future. At the moment, it's in trial with a whole range of different companies. The advantage of Copilot versus ChatGPT is that it's enclosed, so there's no data leakage. If you're putting stuff up into ChatGPT, basically anyone will have access to your data. Now, in terms of presentation, let's watch this one. Oh, sorry, wrong one. This one.
It's time to get ready for your customer pitch meeting. Now, everyone has had a moment when they wish they could turn their proposal into a customer-ready presentation without having to start from scratch? Well, guess what? Now you can. Copilot can turn your Word document into a PowerPoint presentation. Now you have a professional-looking presentation that you can hone and polish. This is truly amazing. Using just your words, Copilot translates Word into PowerPoint and PowerPoint into Word. Now, let's add a slide and give Copilot some quick instructions. There it goes, ready for you to review. Now, this slide is a little bit wordy. Let's ask Copilot to make it more visual. And check this out. Copilot can even animate the slide. It gives it a professional design treatment in a single click. But it doesn't stop there. Copilot can even generate speaker notes. I am serious. Speaker notes. It's not only a time saver, it's helping me be a better presenter and close this deal.
So what you're seeing there is that if you have, for example, a student conducts thesis, they can upload their thesis into Microsoft Copilot. It will generate the full presentation from them, including the speaker notes. Student basically just needs to memorize those speaker notes and will be able to present to them. Which is why the question that I raised in the beginning is, when we're doing oral presentation, what is our learning objective? If it's confirmation of understanding, then an interview type assessment would be more practical. If it's just basically on presentation skills, then just a standard presentation assessment would be suitable. It really comes down to what is our learning objective. One thing that's been raised is that oral assessments have a range of accessibility issues. And that is something that would need to be considered if you were pushing more towards oral assessment types. Okay, any reflection or questions on that?
Yes, Rodney made a comment in the chat that online realistic avatars could take the place of students if the oral is online.
Yes, that's correct. The avatars can mimic your voice and mimic your face.
I've got something to say about that, actually. I hope everyone can hear me. I've got students who had a few students who have presented online. And so the first question about avatars is, how can you be sure that that student is the student that's enrolled anyway, even if it's not an avatar? Could be someone else that they've asked to present for them. So that, obviously you could establish that in different ways, but that's a concern. Something else that I've also encountered, which I think is really interesting about oral presentations, and actually changed the way that I assessed them, was because during the pandemic especially, I had students who were mostly Chinese speaking students. They were preparing a presentation, writing it in Chinese, and then they were using a translator app to translate it into English, and then they were reading the script in English with their camera on, so you can see them talking. But then what's really interesting is, so there is an expectation that they will be able to engage with the content in English. And so then we as instructors would ask a follow-up question based on what they presented to establish what level of understanding they had. And there was a delay because they would run the question through the translator. It would then respond, give them the ChatGPT sort of Chinese. This is only in the last 6 months or so now. I've still got students who are doing online, and a lot of them are finishing their degrees. So there's a delay. They're having translation coming through, and then they are repeating, what through their headphones. It's playing, and then they just repeat the English sentences. So I think, even in that regard, when you ask a follow-up question and say, oh, so you've discussed such and such, they can still use AI to respond, to have a response played to them, and then to repeat that.
That is why the result for this the assessment type was it's complicated.
Mm.
There's a lot that we have to learn about it. So even though we all assume straight away it's strong academic integrity, there's more to it. And as a community, we have to explore that. So thank you for that example. It's a really good example. Okay, let's move to the next type, visual. Let's see what you think now.
Sasha, there's also another comment in the chat from
Okay.
Ash, wondering
quick
about training engineers so we can build bridges that stand. What if
Yes.
ChatGPT can design and build the bridges? Is that an issue?
Well, if we don't have the proper assessment integrity in place, it is definitely an issue.
So is ChatGPT just the new handheld calculator?
ChatGPT isn't a calculator. The difference between a calculator is, all right, try and do something complicated with it. If I ask you, all right, here's a Fourier transform, give me the answer. Now, if you have the calculator in front of you, you need to know what the hell you're doing to be able to plug that into the calculator. In ChatGPT, the reason why it's different is you can use plain, simple words, type it in, and that tool will allow you to get the answer. This is why it's so much more dangerous, I guess, for example, in the engineering field than anything else. Because if you can just ask the question, you can get the answer to pass, more or less, especially when Wolfram Alpha integration really becomes mainstream. In the engineering field, it'll be pretty much unstoppable unless we have the right assessment integrity put in place.
Yes, and a few of the comments coming up in the chat say a human still needs to determine that ChatGPT output is correct. Well, that's true, except if you look at the way a lot of the community uses a calculator, I say, is only as good as its user. But many, many people see an answer on a calculator and think it's correct, even though it's far from being correct. And that's the danger that we run into by relying on things like ChatGPT and just using it without thinking about it. So we need to teach our students how to use it correctly.
Yeah, and bringing it back to the example of the bridge, we can pass a student who has managed to use tools to get them over the line. Just remember P's mean degrees, 50 over the line. With ChatGPT can get there. They go and start designing that bridge, still using ChatGPT. ChatGPT is giving them false information because they don't realize it's wrong, because they only know 50% of the content. And then that bridge collapses sometime into the future. All right, so I'll end this poll here, share the results, and we're very split. But the winner actually is engineering academic assessment. Mainly because for most of the examples that we used, it was non-applicable in terms of the scope of the study. And that's the key, the scope of the study. We had many different types of visual assessment. For example, creating a mind map. We had examples of show me a screenshot of your e-portfolio. These are things that the ChatGPT couldn't produce within its realm. However, Futurepedia showcases the range of AI apps. So if we look at the top right-hand corner, I've got some dates and the amount of apps available. And you can see that in just 3 months, the massive amount of new apps that have come onto the market. So basically, if there's an idea out there, someone is using ChatGPT to create a tool to assist that field. And that covers pretty much anything. So we need to keep that limitation in mind. You know, for example, at the moment, one assessment task that I use is to get students hands-on, build a website to demonstrate your personal branding. There's an example on Twitter that you can see of someone using a sketch that they wrote, hand-drawn, uploaded it onto ChatGPT 4, and it generated the website for them. So in time, even visual evidence could be compromised. I'm going to present an example of an assessment task that we use in Eng 100, where we try and take the more traditional writing type of assessment task and add it to video format and try and to bring out creativities. So we're trying to bring out that higher order skills a little bit to go beyond what you would normally see in the classroom.
Inductor. I was caught in the middle of a direct current circuit. Inductor. My wire wraps round to produce a magnetic field. I store magnetic energy inside my coil. Inductor. When released, I resist the change in current. The flow of electrons run through my coiled wire, produces short circuits when charged in DC. You've been.
So through this example, you can see that there are ways that we could modify our current assessment activities to try and do things a little bit different. ChatGPT, of course, can't, produce this video. However, there are other artificial intelligence tools that can produce video. So it's not completely foolproof, but it is a kind of demonstration of, all right, how can we try and do things a little bit different to bring out that creativity instead of simply something that is knowledge-based that can be produced by an artificial intelligence. Okay, is there any questions here or reflection? Mansi, you've got a question?
I guess it's more of a reflection. I think similar to what I was kind of talking about in the chat, and there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat around fields like engineering and medicine. Ultimately, someone always has to be responsible or accountable. So if the bridge fails and people die, who goes to jail, right? So you could argue, oh, ChatGPT designed the bridge, but ChatGPT can't be sent to jail. So someone authorized the use of ChatGPT's solution to build this bridge. And is that a smart thing to do? Because that's ultimately, they were negligent in their duty to ensure that they're building bridges that don't kill people. Likewise, I'm guessing medicine is similar. So I think the issue around will ChatGPT replace our jobs in the future? There still needs to be an accountability. And I think we do need to teach our students how to use ChatGPT and still be accountable for its output if that's the way that they tend to, do you know what I mean? Like use ChatGPT as a starting point potentially, but ultimately what you submit, you're going to be judged on. So you better be damn sure it's right.
That's 100% correct, Mansi. And that's where the discussion slightly transforms into, all right, this is where the assessment task is, but as we move in, how do we use it as a tool? And it is going to be a tool that engineers are going to need to learn, and we are going to need to learn about the ethics. We're going to need to learn about the limitations of it. And most importantly, we need to learn that we don't enable Skynet to become active. Because the way we're going, that's highly, highly possible. All right, let's move on. Coding. Let's go into the poll. Back. Okay, I'll stop that because the result is pretty obvious what the community is thinking. ChatGPT wins pretty much hands down. Let's see what the winner is. And yes, it is ChatGPT. So pretty much all basic coding in version 3, ChatGPT could do hands down. It did struggle in the assessment task where it was interfacing with an external CSV file. And it was pretty much just as difficult to complete that activity using ChatGPT than it would have been to undertake the task itself. However, from seeing ChatGPT 4, I think pretty much this result would change and it would be all passes using GPT-4 now. So here's just an example of a type of question. You know, a student could pretty much copy paste the code into ChatGPT. It would give them line by line explanation and give them correct working code. And as I mentioned, it failed using the CSV file. Even what we think about languages in a way starts to become obsolete in that, you know, you can quickly translate from one programming language to the next. And the question becomes, what is programming? In the first workshop that I held earlier this year, I had someone talk to me about their experience. When they were a student, programming was all about ones and zeros. So if you didn't know ones and zeros, you didn't know programming. And then the different languages progressed, and learning about ones and zeros, you know, isn't really part of the equation anymore. So are we seeing the evolution of programming? And the key to ChatGPT is that anyone who had an idea really needed to go to a programmer to be able to program. Now it's more about, do you know the process of getting the task complete? If you understand process without the language, you can probably do a fairly decent job. And I present this next example to demonstrate why pretty much anyone who understands process rather than programming might have a good chance.
I wanted to know if ChatGPT could make a video game, so I asked it to make Flappy Bird for me, but we're going to have one rule. I'm not going to write a single line of code. Any code that we use is going to be written by ChatGPT. I'm just going to copy paste it over. This could go very wrong. I wrote a brief description of all the components that go into Flappy Bird. Real quick, it spit out a 6-step plan to make Flappy Bird in the Unity game engine. So following the instructions for steps 1 and 2, we're going to set up an empty game project and add our art for the background and the bird, which brings us to step 3, which is to write a script to give life to the bird so it can flap its wings while flying to the right. But we're not going to write the script, ChatGPT is. We're just going to copy paste the script over. Ta-da! It works. But there's a problem. The bird is flying off the screen. So we're going to ask ChatGPT to fix that and write us some code to have a camera follow the bird as it moves to the right. But you may have noticed that the bird is flying off the background. That was a mistake I made setting up the background in the first place. So I'm going to chalk that one up to human error. My bad. With a quick adjustment, we now have a script working great. At this point, I realized we don't want the game to start right away when the game loads. We have to wait for the player to click at least once to flap their wings before the bird starts moving. Otherwise, you go barreling into the ground as soon as the game starts. As per our main rule, I had ChatGPT write all of the code to delay movement until the player had flapped their wings for the first time. And success! The game now waits until the first click, and then you can flap, flap, flap your heart away. Have you been wondering where the art we've been using came from? Since ChatGPT is writing all of the code, well, if you haven't guessed already, the art is generated by AI as well. I fed rough block-out sketches into Midjourney and had it fill in the details for the background environment, the bird, and the pipe obstacle. This brings us to step number 4. Things are going to get really interesting. In step 4, obstacle pipes are going to start appearing. ChatGPT has given us instructions to hook up the physics for the pipe, which will cause the bird to collide with the pipe, which is how the game's going to end. But as I was reading the instructions ChatGPT had provided, this line caught my eye. ChatGPT was planning to create the obstacles off to the right of the screen. That seems fine, but then it proposed moving the pipes left at a constant speed. I can see why it suggested that, since the pipes do appear to move to the left when you're playing. You see, the bird and camera are already moving to the right, so the pipes should actually remain stationary and allow the bird to fly up to them. I pointed this out to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT agreed. You're right, it said, and it proceeded to correct itself. I copy-pasted the code back in, and now it works great, except, wait, what's going on? The bird's flipping around like some kind of cuckoo bird. This is the first curveball that I'm going to throw at ChatGPT, because this was not part of the original design specification. We're going to ask it to rotate the bird based on whether the bird is moving up or down. Without any hesitation, ChatGPT said, sure. You want the bird to tilt up and down? You got it. And it gave me the code to do so. And now we've got this awesome little bird that tilts up and down based on...
So there you go. If you understand the process, you could become an expert programmer, allowing pretty much anybody in any field to do things that they haven't had the courage to try before. Are there any questions in relation to that? Okay, I have someone going to another meeting, that's fine. Okay, it doesn't seem to be any questions, so we'll move on. All right, the next round is experimentation. So this is your laboratory type work. I think Zoom has crashed. I don't think that's working, is it? Round 6. Does everyone see round 6 poll?
No.
No?
No.
Yeah, I think Zoom's crashed there. All right, let's skip that one there. So the winner at the end of the day is a tie. But again, why? It comes down to component pass. So just like in oral presentations, the students can't, ChatGPT can't take the place in the laboratory or whichever environment it is to undertake the work. But if the student could grab the results and understand enough of the work, they could help it to create the assessable outcome. So if we have a look at the assessable outcome across all the subjects, everything is focused on a technical report. So that is the only real way that across all the different subjects, the learning and the assessment was actually being assessed. The other thing that we need to look at is that the amount of modification required on the prompt is between minor to major. So this is why, again, it's kind of like a component pass, because the students need to know the work. If they've done the experiment, they understand the experiment, they can use it to make their life easy writing the lab report. If they don't understand what they've done, this will be all fails. So it's a very powerful tool and can save students a lot of time if they know what they've actually been doing in the lab, if you're doing lab work. So that's just a summary of what I just said. The interesting thing is that pretty much all assessment tasks focus on the cognitive domain and focus on written type assessment. There are things like demonstrations, interviews, and so forth that could build upon the assessment, but it's not really used much. And the main reason is due to scale and time efficiency. So we really need to think about, all right, what are other ways that we could assess learning in experimentation? And the other interesting factor here is, in another study that I did, is that across the world, engineering believes that writing lab reports is the lowest is the learning objective of lowest importance cognitively, but it is the one activity that we're doing the most in terms of assessing within the laboratory. So it really provides a platform to say, all right, let's think about what we're doing here. Are there other ways of changing that? There are a number of ways that it can help though. The first thing is if the student had to design what type of experiment they had to do, it was very useful in helping them develop the method. It could help them decide what equipment that they would need to carry out that experiment and what type of experimental approaches was required. In terms of writing the report, it could help them with structure, connecting to the theory, and so forth. Any questions there? Do you think there is an issue with authorizing the use of generative AI tools to write up accessible experiments? I think that'd be up to the subject coordinator to make that decision. You know, who owns the copyright? I don't know. Like I said in the very beginning in the disclaimer, I'm not an expert in copyright or anything like that, but I see Monsi's got a hand, and I think she has something good to say.
So look, I think in this space, laboratory work, I think we all agree laboratory work is crucial for engineering. It's absolutely one of the most important things we get our students to do. The issue is, how do we justify giving one student a HD, a different student a D, a different student a credit? Often laboratory work is pass-fail. You either did the experiment well or you didn't. So it's very competency-based. And yet, if you're going to award 10 or 20% of your subject for laboratories, I can understand why people have gone to a report which allows for more of a nuanced marking rubric. The problem is, of course, if we, allowing students to use ChatGPT in the report is fine, but what happens when you have two students who sit down and insert the exact same prompts into ChatGPT, and one generates a lab report worthy of a credit, and the other one with the same prompts generates a lab report worthy of a distinction? How do you justify giving one student a credit and giving a different student a distinction? So I think maybe we need to look at our laboratories. What is it we're actually trying to assess in terms of the laboratory? Is it that they have met a certain competency? And maybe should we be moving to competency assessment for, especially for laboratory-based subjects? I see Rodney's got his hand up too. This will be interesting to hear his opinion.
Yeah, go ahead, Rodney.
Yeah, well, I think I've got the half a subject I still do is a laboratory-based physics subject, and I make sure that in the laboratory they get some innovation. There's actually marks associated with innovation, and so they create their own experiment. They've got equipment there, and they can do some very standard things, but they can use the same equipment to innovate, and it's interesting to see what comes out. So you can actually add things within the laboratory that says, do something different, or I'm sure there's lots of ways we can do it if we think about it, rather than say, do experiment A, then do experiment B, then do experiment C. So the creativity, which, alluded to before, we can do it, but the creativity not in how you can do a music video, but how you can do the engineering or the physics or the mathematics there. So get them to do their own research, and they can use ChatGPT to get ideas. I think we want to do, what is demonstrating to me overall is that we want to say, look, ChatGPT is the new calculator. How are we going to use it? It's there. We're going to live with it. We can keep clamping down and saying, oh, how are we going to stop it cheating in exams? How are we going to stop them doing it in reports? I think we've just got to redesign our assessment. So to say, well, it's a tool, let them use the tool, how do we incorporate it into everyday life?
Yeah. And that's the general message being presented here, that, there are weaknesses, but we have to learn how to use it as a tool. We have to learn how to adapt. Are our assessments that we use currently fit for purpose? If not, let's think about it and let's adjust our approaches. Gökhan?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
So unfortunately, I missed most of the presentation. I had another meeting to attend to. But if it wasn't discussed so far, my question is, we are supposed to cater to students at different levels, right? So some students are better at recall, some students are better at synthesis, and so on and so forth. So obviously, usually the recall is considered the lower level activity, but that's how we design our assessments so that we can pass most of our students that we are asked by the university to do so, right? So that's where ChatGPT or the presence of ChatGPT becomes an issue, because if you ask a recall question, that's the easiest to answer by using ChatGPT. And if we don't ask recall questions by modifying our assessments, are we going to fail? Will we have to fail most of our students then, because they won't be up to the challenge?
Listen, I guess one way of looking at it is which assessment tasks do you introduce that? So as I highlighted in the beginning, you said you missed the beginning with using online quizzes. I use online quizzes and I usually give them very low marks or 0 marks to unlock future content. The idea is, can we take that recall knowledge and make sure that they recall it at least once? Can they interact with it? If the risk reward isn't high enough, then maybe students will use that assessment task for purpose. If not, if the risk reward is too high, they're probably going to use ChatGPT if the protections aren't in place. So what we're going to do is we are just simply going to have to rethink our assessment tasks. What do we want out of the students? How are we going to get them to demonstrate that? And there's a bit of work from Philip Dawson, who I showed in the beginning. He's got a bit of work on reimagining digital assessments. That's probably a good starting point to generate a few ideas. Can ChatGPT mark assignments for us yet? I think this is where we should look into next. Yes, people are already looking into that. So probably in the next, I don't know, small time frame, short-term time frame, you know, there's going to be an app for that, believe me. All right, let's move on to the next section. All right, the next bit is written project-based, and it's basically based on the same presence of experimentation, but this is more your project work, especially team-based project work. And the winner here is engineering education assessment. So we get a lot more fails, and what we get is a few component passes. So our project-based work is usually where the assessment tasks or activities that we encourage that greater, higher level thinking, that higher level of creativity, the higher level of creativity in all sorts. So this provides the opportunity of integration with ChatGPT is where I found. So there's small components that it can pass. There are places where it could pass if the student built upon it, but it's not good enough overall, which allows us to really delve deeper here. So just like the other assessment tasks, ChatGPT can't undertake the project work, but it can be a very supportive tool for coming up with ideas and doing the written work. So here is one example of a project subject. So students undertake an industry component where they work with a real client, real problem. So here I say, I'm undertaking a project for Brickworks Limited on their product precast concrete insulated panels. I need to develop ideas as to how I can improve sustainability of the product. Can you provide me with some brainstorming ideas and some free resources that I should begin exploring with? And that will create you some original prompts to think your mind. It will give you some resources. And the aim here then is for students to consider, are the suggestions feasible? Research the various suggestions, explore the suggested resources, and so forth. You know, not all information provided by ChatGPT is real. A lot of links are actually fake links and so forth. And not all information is correct. But it does provide, for example, students the opportunity to start working out, where do I begin? And especially with project-based work, the literature clearly says that getting started is one of the hardest components and what leads to success or fail of the group at the end. Another example is, if we've moved on a little bit more into the project, is what Australian standards should I consider for this project? And ChatGPT will provide you a list of different standards. What it comes down to is the student working out, is the standard real? Is the standard relevant? What do I need to know about the standard, and so forth? And from what I could see from my prompting, is that the responses that ChatGPT gave, the more you pushed it, would provide students a learning experience of understanding standards and which standards are relevant much better than currently capable on them doing it their own. This is somewhere, an area of work that students are currently struggling with. And if they actually did use it using this process, they'd actually be able to engage and understand standards much better. Any questions there? No? Okay. We move down to written, reflective, and critical thinking. So, even though it's AI, ChatGPT is the winner. But what we really need to take note of is the level of modification required. And the key for ChatGPT winning this round, clearly, is that they need to understand what the output looks like. If the student does not know what the output should look like, they will most probably be fails throughout. Because if you're basically copy pasting a question or a task into ChatGPT, what you're going to get is very generic. And that generic bit of writing is very clear to the marker that, all right, this doesn't seem right. But if they understand the concept of what the reflective writing is wanting from them, and they can feed in the examples, they can get a result that might not be a high distinction, but enough to get them over the line. And what I mentioned here is prompt engineering is the key. So I'll give you an example. Here, a simple prompt of reflect on the sustainable engineering design subject with a focus on industry site visits, in-person or virtual guest lectures, and research into your own inspiring alumni. If you put that in, you would get something that would not pass. It's just too generic. It shows that there's no reflective writing in there. To bring it on just to that next level, just to nudge it over the line of what might be a pass, the student would add in examples. So we went on industry site visits. This is where we visited. This is what we saw. We learned a little bit about this. We saw this person and they presented on that, and so forth. And that just gives it a little bit more to alter the output of that reflection to bring it up to a level that would just cross over the pass line. Now, the more you adapt this prompt, you can move from a pass to a credit to a high distinction. But in order to do that, you really need to understand what the output is. Now, the risk in this is not on the student. The risk becomes on contract cheating. Because if I have a subject and I understand what the output is like, I can put in the input parameters. ChatGPT can, on every regeneration, provide something unique, so it won't pass on, turn it in. So if I'm a contract cheater, I can reduce the fee payable by students, which will mean more students can access me. And so I would get a lower figure per student, but a high volume of student, and the financial outcome would be the same. Here's another example. Can you use the STAR method to provide a 150-word response? And it can do that. So if you're specific enough with what type of reflection you want, the output will be reflective of what you need. And that's why prompt engineering is key. I think I saw someone with their hand raised. Was that? No?
Okay, had her hand up for a little bit.
Thanks. I was thinking about how you can get them to use a specific reflection method, but of course, then that provides the parameters for ChatGPT AI to do that. I guess one of the things we look at in nursing because we do a lot of reflection, is look at the authenticity of what the students are writing, especially if we're asking them to reflect on an experience that they've had on clinical placement. And so it's that evaluation, but again, moving away from written, we are in the School of Nursing looking to see how we can move away from written assessments because of the AI issue. But also thinking about what you've been talking about all along is, what are we actually looking to assess in the student? For what are we looking for the student to demonstrate, and thinking about, that authentic assessment that demonstrates, can they do this? So, I guess we're lucky in nursing and medicine in a way, because we can use our OSCE assessments, which AI can't do for the students. So that's a little bit easier than all these things. But I've learned a whole lot today, so I really appreciate coming today and all the work that you've done.
There's a question in the chat in regard whether the ChatGPT output is detectable. Now, the advantage of Turnitin as standard is that it can prove that you have copied someone else's work. It shows the highlight, it will link you to that text. Now, I haven't really explored these ChatGPT type detectors in any way at the moment, but I just can't visually understand how that's going to work, because it can say it's highly likely, but how do you prove that it was generated by ChatGPT? It creates a huge question mark. And then what that leads down to is we will need to follow up. So the workload on the academic community will increase. So if the detection technique isn't very accurate, or has a large gray area, can you imagine the amount of work that will be then pushed onto academia to work out, all right, how can we ask this student or check to see if they understand this beyond the assessment task given. So that's why we really need to think about assessment tasks and change them in the first place before getting ourselves stuck in that huge mess. Elaine, you have a question?
Yes, I just had a comment that one of our teaching staff actually put one of their essays, because they're also a student at university, they put one of their essays into ChatGPT 0, and it came up and it said it was most likely AI generated. So, it just goes to show we can't always trust that as well. My comment was for you, in the reflection that you had shown us before, there was an I statement being used. And I just wanted to know, did ChatGPT put the I statement in there, or was that the student's kind of addition to that?
Was this?
No, it was the one that you just had on there.
Yeah.
I participated in a design project.
Yeah, this is complete output, straight output from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
It's very difficult. That's why it says the secret sauce is prompt engineering. If you know how to type in the input, you can pretty much get any output that you want. All right, so the final round, research. And the winner at the moment is us human beings. Pretty much on every assessment task, ChatGPT failed. And the main reason that it failed is because it has not been trained with scholarly literature very well, not much quantity or very well. I'm not sure the background behind that, but it lies a lot. It provides references to work that doesn't exist. And a lot of the work that it does present is outdated. In saying that, I have seen that in ChatGPT 4, it is starting to get better. The amount of false DOIs that it's producing is going down substantially. So they are working on it. So probably in 2 to 3 years, it's probably going to be much more reliable in terms of research. Another reason that failed a lot of these activities is because of the scaffolding and what was required from them. It limited the contribution to ChatGPT could make to the assessment mark. However, in saying that, it is very useful as a tool in research. So yeah, so fake references, limited word count is a big issue with ChatGPT version 3. It required you breaking things up into small chunks and working with it a small bit at a time. Yeah, and figures and tables, etc., still cause a problem. I did mention word limit. So in ChatGPT, the total word limit that you're using is 3,000, but in GPT-4, it raises up to 25,000. In terms of the actual prompt, we're only being able to interface with about 500 words at a time. I'm not sure what that is with ChatGPT-4, but the larger the word count, the greater the amount of words that you can interact with. It's just going to make research much easier. But let's see what happens. So let's figure out how we can use this supporting tool. So basically here, what I have said here is something that is a student has written. And basically I've put in a command here. Can you rewrite that using academic English at the university level? So if a student is not very well at in writing, they can plug it in, they can get something generated, which is not much difference to using Grammarly at the moment, or other paraphrasing type technologies that are currently available. On the flip side, you can take some very technical information and you can say, can you rewrite that using English that a 10-year-old understand? So it can take something that most students would go straight over their heads and explain it to them in a way that would actually make sense to them. If you're an international student, you know, it can translate that into another language. You can also ask it to summarize the information. So there is a benefit there for understanding. The other opportunity is that you can feed in one at a time relevant sections of your thesis, and you can help you create different sections. So you can help you develop the methodology. You can ask it to find out what is the significance from all these different studies. What is the gap, and can you help me write a research question to address that gap? Can you help me with findings, conclusions, and so forth? So it can help with the thought process for students in conducting research. So here's an example. What type of research design could be used to create an experiment to answer the following questions? So I've just put in a little bit of information here, and ChatGPT can come out and say, for these research questions, an experimental research design would be appropriate, and it would explain what type of experiment you would conduct. So this sort of like gets linked, I guess, to a little bit of Rodney's laboratory approach of, all right, here's what's available in the classroom. Can you create an experiment to do this? So ChatGPT could be used as a tool to help students think through that process. Any questions there? Yes, Johan, please go ahead.
Hey, Rather than a question, I'll just add to what you said. I tried actually all three of them available to us so far: ChatGPT, Bing, which is actually using ChatGPT in the background, and Bard, which is from Google. So Bard and ChatGPT were terrible, and scientific literature search and answering questions from literature. But Bing is actually fairly good. When it doesn't know, it tells you that I don't know this. And then when it knows, it gives you the references that you can go back and check. And most of the time they are correct, but not all the time.
That's because Bing is using ChatGPT 4. And as I mentioned, ChatGPT 4 is much better.
Yeah.
There are a whole range of plugins for ChatGPT 4 focused on research. I've been watching some YouTube videos on them. They're still not that good, but it is getting better. And that's the main thing that we just need to keep in mind. Whatever we do today, if we just try and take a small step, the technology is moving faster than our small steps. And we got to think, more holistically, how do we change our assessment approaches? So before we continue and we have our final discussion, I just want to encourage any person out there who has enjoyed any part of this and thinks the information is of value to take that link and post it on Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever social media that you use, because I really want to get the message out there into the community. All right, so final thoughts.
Sasha, could you
Yes.
repost the link, please?
Yeah.
It seems there's a lot of stuff there. I can't find it.
All right. Could you put that in the chat for me?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just been popped in there
Oh,
already.
has? Excellent. All right. So I've talked a lot. We've had a little bit of discussion. Now I want to open up the floor to everybody who wants to reflect on what we've said, especially with ideas on how we can do things differently and so forth.
In the chat at one point, there was a bit of discussion about how we detect the use of ChatGPT in assessment tasks. So at the moment, the university isn't using Turnitin, I believe. And we just need to be careful when trying to detect it. The suggestion has been made to take someone's submission and pop it into ChatGPT, but that's a problem with privacy for the student because that's their intellectual property and you've just fed it into ChatGPT. So potentially a slightly better option might be to ask ChatGPT to provide an answer to your own assignment if you're happy to put your assignment question into it and see how that goes. I do know a colleague of mine did that for a student and got the exact same solution that the student gave. So, but that's in mathematics. So that could happen, but unfortunately ChatGPT, as Eileen's just said, does generate a different response pretty much every time you put in the same question. So it's a problem at the moment. It can come down to how well you know your students actually.
And just be aware that ChatGPT lies. So if you put something in there and it says, I did this, you can't trust that it's actually correct. Monse, you've got your hand up.